Hey, how's it going everyone? Civil Monkey here, back with our build guide. This one is an updated build guide for Supply Moisture Valby, who recently just got some changes, where they removed snapshotting from her kit, so her third ability can no longer snapshot, but they buffed her in other ways to compensate for that, making her not only good at Onslaught, but because they greatly reduced the cooldown on her third ability, she's also now good at other modes, since when you hop on your bike, the time that takes for you to travel from one to the next, your third ability is already off cooldown, meaning she can do things like Axion Dungeons, breach tracking, and a whole bunch of other game modes. But if you don't know what Supply Moisture does, let me go ahead and throw it up on the screen there, pause and go ahead and read if you need to. But now Valby's just generally good at pretty much everything, and she still just melts through all the high health enemies that you've seen in things like Onslaught, and all the other in-game modes. But that's enough of me yapping, let's go ahead and get you guys into the build so you can get out there with Valby. And as always, we'll go ahead and start off with our mod section, where I'll go ahead and break down every mod in the build and how they fit into it as well. And starting off our mods will be our crit section, with our first module being Skill Insight, which we're running because this gives us a lot of skill critical hit rate, which we want to be able to make our crits more consistent. Then next we have Skill Concentration. This just increases skill critical hit damage. In fact, it's the most out of any non-Ancestor module in the game. So we really want this because we really want to see our damage be a lot higher. And then we have Front Lines and Emergency Measures. Now, both of these we're actually running for the exact same reason. They both give us a nice mix of skill critical hit rate and skill critical damage, which we want so that we get more damage and we have more consistent high damage. Now, why are we actually running crit with Valby in the first place? Well, even though Valby has a really low skill critical hit rate for her base, which usually does affect whether a character is crit or not, her third ability can proc every 0.1 seconds, meaning it's a very rapid hitting ability, and because of this we can overwhelm the low crit rate with just mass quantity. And it turns out, even with all these modules, and not including an Ancestor module, the DPS from having crit here versus non-crit is still higher for the crit value. And especially when we start adding in Ancestor modules where we make the crit even more consistent and higher crit damage values, this starts to become massively higher damage values than a non-crit Valby. But the main reason we're able to run it is once again just because we're able to rapidly proc it, so we're able to overwhelm that low crit rate. And then on top of crit, we're also going to be increasing our damage through MP, because it turns out Valby has MP scalings that scale up her damage. And our first module here is going to be HP Conversion MP. Now, this one gives us a large amount of MP with the only downside of lowering our max HP, but we increase our HP in other areas to compensate for that, so we're perfectly fine with removing a little bit of our HP, since this will greatly ramp up our damage. And next we have Enlightenment. This is just your basic MP module, has no downside, so it's a really easy one to run here. Now, why are we actually running MP? Well, once again, Valby has damage scalings that are based off her max MP. And they're actually fairly significant. In fact, at the max value of 650, you get up to 200% additional damage. Now, unfortunately, we will only be hitting about 619 MP here, but that's perfectly fine because that's still 190% out of the 200 max we could get. And instead, we'll increase our damage further in other ways. And of course, one of those other methods is going to be through our skill power modules, with the first one being non-attribute specialist, which we're going to run for a few reasons. First one being Valby's non-attribute descendant, thus she does want some non-attribute skill power. Second reason is non-attribute specialist gives us the most non-attribute skill power out of any non-ancestor module in the game, so it gives us a nice healthy chunk of that. The next reason is because we really want to balance out our skill power pools to get the maximum amount of damage, and we really only get non-attribute skill power from this one module in our Reactor. Instead, through other places in the build, we'll get base skill power to kind of balance out the two pools to once again maximize that damage. In fact, one of those other places is our next module, Widespread Execution, which gives us a nice chunk of base skill power every time we do damage with a normal AoE ability, which our third ability, our main damage ability, is. And the only downside to this is every time you proc that, You do increase your cooldowns, but since we only really care about our third ability here, and that's a continuous cast ability, we really don't care about increasing our cooldowns. In fact, the only time we use any of our other cooldowns really is to refill our ammo. But you don't have to do that too often, so once again, we just really don't care about those cooldowns. And our next module is going to be HP amplification. Now, running this one for survivability, because things in endgame like Onslaught tend to hit really hard. So without running extra survivability, you will get down instantly, meaning you do no damage. So we're running HP amplification here because it gives us a nice chunk of HP, with the only downside being it takes away our shields, but we really don't care about our shields because our HP scales much better. And then as always, we'll move Ancestor Mods to its own section, where we'll go ahead and take every different stat you can roll in your Ancestor module, break them down, and put them into a tier chart. You guys can use a reference if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. Now, if you guys want to jump to that right now, there is a timestamp in the timeline of the video itself, and also a timestamp in the description as well. And now that we're done with our main modules, let's go ahead and hop into our trigger module. And for this one, we'll be running Gap in Time, which is a really cool module that every time you do damage with a normal AoE ability, it takes that damage, the final damage by the way, and then does 35% more damage on top of that. So when you do damage to this, you'll see your original damage number, and then you'll just see a second damage proc after that. That's the 35% additional damage, which is really huge because this just means we get a 35% damage increase across the board, since all of our damage is really going to come from our third ability, which is a normal AoE ability. Especially when we're talking about the types of numbers that First Descendant gets into damage-wise, a 35% damage increase is just massive. Now, the only downside of Gap in Time is its trigger rate, where its trigger rate is inversely proportional to your cooldown. So if you're running 90% cooldown, Gap in Time only has a 10% proc rate. But if you're running 0 cooldown, like we do in this build, it turns out Gap in Time triggers 100% of the time. Meaning, because we don't run cooldown, because we don't need it, we just flat out get a 35% increased damage for our third ability, which is once again our main damage ability. That's why Gap in Time is just really good here, is because of that. Now let's finally go ahead and move on to our Ancestor module section, where we'll go over every stat you can roll on your Ancestor module, and break them down and put them into a tier chart. You guys can use a reference if your Ancestor module is good, or if you want to go and re-roll it. And starting with our best tier, which is going to be S tier, we have Fusion Skill Power Boost Ratio. This is a really good stat to roll because it's going to greatly increase your overall damage. And this is because in First Descendant, there's not many places you can get type skill power, which Fusion is a type skill power, compared to something like an attribute skill power, which there's plenty of places to get attribute skill power. So this is going to be pretty much your only place that you can really greatly increase it, really anywhere in the build. So that's why it's such a vital stat to roll. Then you have Skill Critical Hit Rate. This is because don't forget, Valby we're going to crit character. And since Valby has such a low crit rate, getting any crit will make our damage more consistent. And we want that consistent high damage, so rolling crit rate is going to be really good as well. And then Skill Crit Hit Damage is our other stat in S tier. This is another really good one to roll because it just overall increases our damage and allows us to hit harder. And then let's go to A tier. Now A tier are still really good stats. They just aren't quite as good as S tier. Our first one here is non-attribute skill power boost ratio. Now this one will also greatly increase your damage. It's just not as vital as Fusion is because, as we've gone over in the build, there are plenty of places we can get non-attribute skill power. But this will still increase our damage. It's still a really good stat to roll. Then we have Max MP. This is a really good stat to roll because it can give us that last 10% of damage we're missing from Valby's MP damage increase. But it's not super vital since it's not that huge of a damage increase compared to some of the other stats you can roll. But it's still a damage increase and a good one at that. And then we have Max HP. This is just more survivability, which is always good to get. And then going to our middle of the pack values in B tier, we have Fusion Skill Modifier. Once again, Valby is a Fusion character, but since most of our damage comes from our third ability, that already has really high skill modifiers, we really don't need to worry about increasing it too much. But this isn't a bad stat to roll because it does give you somewhat of a damage increase. It's just nowhere close to anything like rolling a skill power boost ratio 1 would. And then we have defense. This is just, once again, same with max HP. Some more survivability, which is never bad to get. And then going on to C tier. Now C tier is the tier that you just kind of want to avoid, because the stats here don't really help the build if you get them as a positive, but if you get them as a negative, they will hurt the build. So you just kind of want to avoid these stats. And here we have skill cost. Now the reason why this one's here is because your third ability does technically have a continuous MP cost, but we're able to keep up with that MP cost and pretty much ignore it. But if you take this as a negative, you make it so that you actually have to worry about the cost. So you don't want to take it as a negative, and if you take it as a positive, it's not going to do anything, because once again, we already managed the cost well enough. So just avoid skill cost. And then finally, D tier. Now, D tier is the tier that you want to take as negative values, because they really don't do anything to help the build as a positive value and sometimes hurt it. And at the same time, they don't do anything if you take them as a negative, so they're perfect values to take as negatives because they don't hurt the build at all. Our first value here is skill cooldown. Now, as we talked about before, Valby doesn't really need any cooldown here because her third ability is continuous cast. We're also running gap in time, so we really do not want cooldown as a positive at all, because that will ruin the trigger rate. And then, because we really don't need to cast our other abilities too often other than refilling our ammo, we just really don't care about cooldown. So we can take this as a negative. Then we have dimension skill boost ratio and dimension skill modifier. Valby has 0 dimension scalings in this build, so these values just don't do anything, so perfectly take as a negative. Then next we have max shield. Once again, we're focusing on max HP because that scales better, so we don't care about max shield at all. Then next we have skill effect range. So your third ability is actually locked in its range. So whether you take a value as a positive skill effect range, it won't increase it. If you take it as a negative, it won't decrease the range because that range is just locked. So this actually affects our build pretty much like in no way at all. Technically, it would actually affect your first, second, and fourth abilities, but because we're not using those for damage, and all you really need to have is like 1 foot in the puddle to get your ammo back, we really don't care about the range at all. And then our last value in D tier is skill duration up. Now this one I did debate about, because technically you could have the pools up for longer, and you can get the buffs for longer, and you get infinite ammo for a longer period of time. But because we really don't care about that, mainly because Hammer and Anvil is going to be our main mobbing gun, and that you really don't have to refill the ammo too much, we really don't care about duration at all. In fact, because it only would affect, once again, your first, second, and fourth abilities, since our third ability is an infinite cast already, we're fine taking this as a negative value because it really won't affect us at all. And you really only need the puddle for like 1 second, not even that, to get completely full magazine of ammo. I mean, if you literally just sit in the puddle for shooting for half a second, your ammo will go from 1 bullet to completely full on all your ammo reserves. So we really don't care about duration, so we're fine with taking this as a negative because of that. And that's going to go ahead and wrap up the tier chart here for your Ancestor module. Hopefully this will help you guys when you're trying to determine if your Ancestor module is good or if you want to go ahead and re-roll it. And now that we finished all of our main module sections, let's go ahead and hop into our Arche Tree. But the first 2 nodes we're going to want to grab are those 2 HP nodes at the bottom, since once again in Onslaught and other endgame modes, enemies hit fairly hard, so we want that extra survivability. Then the next things we're going to want to grab here are going to be our crit nodes, so we have more consistent crits, and they hit harder. And along the way, we're also going to want to go ahead and grab pretty much every MP node that we can. So don't forget, Valby also scales with MP, so this will also increase our damage. And then using any leftover nodes, we'll just grab skill power to also increase our damage. And we also want to make sure to hit that node in the upper right there for our Mutant Cell. Which, let's go ahead and hop into our Mutant Cell now. So what we're going to run for our Mutant Cell is going to be Arche Chain Catalyst. Now the reason we want to go ahead and run this one is because in a lot of the endgame modes, enemies get fairly high resistance, and this will help us reduce that a lot. Meaning we can do more damage. This is just another way we want to be able to maximize our damage. And for our component set, we'll be running Slayer set. Now the reason we're running Slayer set here is because we want the skill power from it. And that's pretty much the only reason. And we're running this one over Enlightened Mage set because we're not running any cooldown to be able to run Gap in Time. so we really can't keep up in Enlightened Mage set. Instead, we'll just go for the consistent skill power from Slayer set. This will also help us balance out our skill power pools a little bit more, since we're already getting some non-attribute skill power from our module section, along with a little bit of skill power, which will really ramp up our damage. Now, for your substats here, what you're going to want to run is max HP, max MP, MP recovery modifier, and MP recovery in combat. This will help us keep up with our MP costs, and give us a little bit more damage from the max MP, along with a little bit more survivability from the max HP. And then going on to our component cores, what you'll want to run is 4 max HP. This is because Valby scales a lot better with HP than shields. And then you'll want to run 4 defense for more survivability. Now for our Inversion Reinforcement, we'll be mainly focusing on survivability with these nodes, with our first one being Selective Stimulation to give us a heal every once in a while. Then our second one is going to be Deploy Hardened Shell, which just gives us damage taken reduction, so we just take less damage as we get hit. And then our third and final node will be Combat Adaptation. This one, every time you defeat an enemy, you also take damage reduction. So that means as you defeat enemies, you'll take less damage. Once again, we're trying to focus on survivability here, since we already get enough damage from everywhere else in our kit. And the reactor we'll be running for this build will be a fusion non-attribute reactor. That's because Valby's a fusion character in this build, and she's also non-attribute. And then for your substats, because we want more crit, we're going to run skill critical hit rate, and then also skill critical damage. This was once again to make our crits more consistent and hit harder. And now finally time for the weapons for this build, which do matter, since Valby is a gun descendant with this module, and we need weapons that synergize with her. But since the guns are not the main focus of this build video, I'll just go ahead and show their builds on the screen, and we'll talk about why these guns are important for this build. Starting with our first weapon here, which is Python. Now, the reason why you want to bring Python along is because this will be your high-level enemy / boss killing gun, since not only does it do a lot of damage with a high fire rate, which you need to be able to proc Valby's third ability here, it also has the unique passive of being able to reduce non-attribute resistance, which is really good when you get that stacked up on something like the Colossi that spawns as the final boss in Onslaught. So this becomes a really important weapon for boss killing. Now, as a side note, this can also be substituted with Thunder Cage, since that gun also hits a high fire rate, but I mainly suggest Python for this one. And then going on to our second weapon, which will be Hammer and Anvil. Now the reason why I'm running this one is this will be kind of like your mob clearing build, mainly due to Hammer and Anvil's second ability, or its alternate fire mode, since that can actually proc Valby's third ability. And this becomes really nice in something like Onslaught, or if you want to cover multiple areas, what you can basically do is fire off the alternate fire into a wave or a corridor, and it will cover that area for a few seconds, and then during that time, you can go and you can move to another area and cover that one as well. This allows you to cover multiple angles, which becomes very useful. It also just has a nice rapid tick rate, so it can proc our third ability relatively easily, and hit multiple targets. Now, our third weapon is going to be another mobbing weapon, and it's going to be Eye of Typhoon, which is really good with Valby's third ability because each of the individual beams can proc Valby's third ability. Now, unfortunately, this one is usually less efficient at just general wave clear than Hammer and Anvil, since Hammer and Anvil can not only apply Valby's third ability quicker, but also can spread it over a wider area and can cover multiple points at once. The downside of Hammer and Anvil, though, is because your alternate fire just randomly shoots at different enemies in its radius and doesn't hit everything at once, you can't really direct where each shot's going to go. And that's where Eye of Typhoon becomes pretty useful. Eye of Typhoon becomes a much better gun at being kind of a directed mobbing clearing gun. Especially, this becomes useful in Onslaught with the enemies that have the drones above their heads that give shields not only to themselves, but to all the enemies around them. Eye of Typhoon is much better dealing with those because it can continuously lock onto those drones and destroy them relatively quickly. Hammer and Anvil has a much more difficult time until you really ramp up your damage, because it can't just consistently hit those drones. So that's where Eye of Typhoon becomes really useful, it becomes more of a directed one where you can decide what you're going to lock onto and shoot, and it's more consistent damage on that one target. Once again, compared to Hammer and Anvil, which is randomly shooting different enemies within its range and doesn't consistently hit the same target. It just alternates between a whole bunch of different targets in its radius. So that's kind of the difference between Hammer and Anvil and Eye of Typhoon here. Both are really good mob clearing guns, but you'll generally use Hammer and Anvil for most of your clearing, and then Eye of Typhoon if you need some kind of specialized wave clearing where the enemy has some mechanic like the drone above their head that needs to get destroyed quickly, so you can quickly kill that wave. And finally, time for the tips and tricks section, where I'll show you guys a few things to help you along while you're playing Valby. So the first thing I want to show you guys was about getting your ammo back really quickly with Hammer and Anvil. So we'll just summon some enemies, kill this, go to our second, alternate fire. It turns out you get ammo back even with the alternate fire, as you guys can see there. I'm just instantly back full on ammo. This just makes it really easy with Hammer and Anvil because you don't have to worry about, running forward with your main fire and shooting like that. You can just get your puddle going and then just alternate fire to just keep getting your infinite ammo. Like I said, this just instantly refills it, so it's just pretty useful. Other thing I did want to show you guys was your third ability does deactivate when you get on your bike, but thanks to them greatly reducing the cooldown on that, it's fine because your third ability will back off cooldown when you're going between areas. It also does still get on cooldown when you get knocked back, so just be careful when you're running up to an enemy that can do knockback, because they will deactivate your third ability with that knockback. And then that's going to go and wrap up the first build video. Now, Valby's still really strong. It's just through this build, she just needed a few different changes from the previous version of this build, but she still melts through everything. But let me know what you guys think of the build down in the comments down below, or if you have any questions, also get me up down below as well. And if you enjoyed the video or plan to use the build, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps out the video a lot. Also, if you want to know when new videos are coming out, don't forget that subscribe button and that notification bell. Also, I do stream most days on Twitch. I'll go ahead and throw up the information on the screen there. And once again, if you guys could hit that like button, it really does help out the video get out to a lot more people. I'd appreciate it a lot. And that's going to be it for this video. I appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch y'all again next time.